Welcome to my place. This is a place that I can come and do a little reading and studying. This is the way that I gain inspiration and ideas about things that I'm able to do in woodworking. I would like to share with you the story about one such family that I have become to know through some reading, and that is the Dunlaps. The Dunlap family were Scotch-Irish, which meaning they were of Scottish heritage, had lived in Ireland. Actually, before they immigrated to America, their families had lived there 3 or 4 generations. They immigrated to America, settled in southern New Hampshire. So I would like to tell you about the lives of these particular cabinet makers. First of all, let me tell you how I became interested in the Dunlaps. As we grow and mature as woodworkers, we search out for ways of gaining inspiration and knowledge about furniture history, other cabinet makers. And I discovered the Dunlaps while browsing in a bookstore in Chicago. I ran across this book. And my first impression of the book, the work that they did, was quite surprised to find that I thought the work was sort of out of proportion, not very well designed. But this is really what caught my eye, because as I began to think about this, I began to realize that somebody had gone to an awful lot of trouble to write a story and a book on a family of cabinet makers. So my curiosity got the best of me. I purchased the book and became very interested in the work that they had done, and found out it was a very ornate, very decorative work on some common pieces of furniture at the time. As the Dunlaps immigrated and settled in America, they not only were cabinet makers, they had to be farmers, hunters, and do other things to subsist. So cabinet making was their occupation, but it was reserved mostly for the wintertime because of chores that occupied other times of the years. And one thing that really that I think was important to me is the comparison of what they did today and what they had to work with and what we have to work with, both from tools and materials. Now they lived in the midst of some virgin yellow birch, maple, so they had access to wonderful material, but they didn't have the power tools or the shops that we have today. And it makes you stop and think, what if they did? What if they could have had access to what we have to work with today? And through this, it should inspire us to maybe do more and better of what we do. For instance, just the procuring of lumber, to log big virgin logs during the 18th century, they certainly didn't have the equipment for a logging operation that we have today. So that was quite a chore. Today we can go down to the local lumber store and buy whatever material we need. Quite a contrast. Also, it's quite a contrast in the tools that we have. Our power tools and the machines that we have kind of takes us away from the necessities of using hand tools. But all the Dunlaps had were hand tools. In fact, upon John Dunlap's death, John being one of the members of the family, the inventory of his tools you could have put in a moderately sized toolbox. Primarily there were 3 brothers, John, Daniel, and Samuel. all of the work of the brothers were very similar. They were working within the demands and the constraints of the time. They built furniture that they were asked to build. They were taking traditional pieces of furniture, functional pieces of furniture, and added the ornamentation. You know, I feel like that if we could realize why their skills were developed as they were, it's because they used the hand tools from necessity. But we need to realize that if we can use hand tools a little more, that it would increase our skill and maybe perhaps change the way that we view things and the way that we may do things today. Before we talk about the work of the Dunlaps, let's just see exactly where they fit into the period of the evolution of furniture. Of course, we know that in the 17th century, in the 1600s, when America was first being settled, the period of furniture at that time was the Jacobean period, which a lot of people refer to as colonial furniture, pilgrim furniture. Furniture at this time was very essential, very functional. It was furniture that was built rugged. A lot of oak wood was used in Jacobean furniture, strap carving, but it can be recognized mainly as just very essential functional pieces of furniture. A lot of chests, a lot of benches, some tables, but tables may be doubled as a bench or a chair and a table. Next, after people became a little bit more financially successful, and they wanted a little more elegant furniture, and being a lot of immigration from England, of course, a lot of the English influence came to America. And the next defined period of furniture was the William and Mary period. The William and Mary period, we started seeing more elegance, more, you might say, non-essential furniture, bulbous turnings, a little more ornate, little fancier woods. So this reflected the financial and the social progress of America. As time went on and people began to be able to afford more elegant furniture, then the Queen Anne period of furniture came into existence. Now you notice that each period of furniture lasted anywhere from 25 to 50 years. So when we get through the Queen Anne furniture, we're approaching the middle of the 18th century, just about the time the Dunlaps immigrated to America. But now then, people were demanding a little bit better furniture, and the Queen Anne, we started seeing some carvings and this sort of thing. Now, when the Dunlaps started making furniture, now another period has come about, and we call that the Chippendale period. Now we're into the latter half of the 18th century. The Chippendale, not unlike the Queen Anne period, was elegant. It still represented traditional pieces of furniture that were needed at the time. And primarily, a lot of casework was demanded, drawer space, and this sort of thing. So the Dunlaps were making furniture that was needed and demanded at the time, and generally in the Chippendale style, but they added ornamentation that was unlike other cabinet makers. So they took this Chippendale style and the traditional pieces and yet added another very ornamental dimension to the furniture. Now let's look at some of the Dunlap designs. These pictures were scanned from the book entitled The Dunlap Cabinet Makers by Philip Zay. This is a high chest of drawers by John Dunlap. Promoted for its individuality when it came on the antiques market in 1929, this high chest of drawers is the most costly piece of furniture entered in John Dunlap's account book. This is a chest on frame attributed to the Dunlap workshops. Found in Ware, New Hampshire, this chest on chest is very shallow and incorporates several distinctive features that are more exaggerated than those usually found on the usual Dunlap furniture. This is another chest on frame. Actually, it was made by one of John Dunlap's apprentices, Samuel Gregg. And if you'll notice, there is no pediment on the top. This cost extra. This is a desk. It is attributed to either John Dunlap or Samuel Dunlap. Many times it was very difficult to tell who the actual cabinet maker was, but in this case, no doubt it was made in the Dunlap workshops. The desk was constructed with wooden pins rather than nails, which may suggest workmanship early in the Dunlap's career. This represents a close-up view of the pediment. This particular chest was originally stained in dark red to simulate mahogany. The upper course of flowered ogee molding, a variant of the egg and dart pattern, was painted green with gilded edges. All the features of this pediment pretty much incorporate all the various details that they used. Of course, each pediment varied a little bit from other pediments. Many times the Dunlaps had to color or stain wood to resemble more expensive wood. You know, today we can go down to the local paint store and buy whatever color stain we need. Let's examine what the Dunlaps had to do to stain their wood. I'd like to read you a formula for a stain. To stain wood or to resemble mahogany, take 2 pounds of logwood, a tree found in Central America and the West Indies, chip fine, put in a clean brass kettle, add 1 gallon of water, boil this 4 hours, and then take out your chips. Evaporate to 1 quart. Strain and brush your maple 3 times over. Let it dry between each brushing. Then take 1 ounce of courtney root, 1 ounce of dragon's blood, 1 ounce of logwood, all made fine, put in a quart bottle. Add to this 1 pint of spirits of wine. Let it seep 24 hours. Turn it off clear. Brush it once over after the logwood is brushed, and so done. Now, how would you like to do that? Now that we know a little bit about the history of the Dunlap furniture and where it fits, let's step into the present now. We'll show a finished piece and some pieces in progress, and finally a demonstration of how we go about recreating a Dunlap pediment. This is a walnut corner cabinet that features the Dunlap pediment. That's characteristics of the basket weave pierced carving, the sunbursts, the rosettes. This is a current project that I've been working on, where I've used the Dunlap in conjunction with some other decorative features. To add color and interest, I incorporated some relief carving of some floral designs. So the question was what flower do I use? What floral arrangement do I use? I broke a twig off of a neighboring dogwood tree and copied it for this for this design here. This is shallow relief. This design is out of a book, and it's a design of a dahlia. But just outline it in shallow relief. Now it will be painted which will add color. The carving up here is actually it's applied, and I have an example of another cabinet that I'm doing, where I just freehand drew the flowers out, the floral arrangement. Scroll sawed it out, applied it, glued it, then I glued it to the base, then I carved the top, which gives a lot of depth and looks a lot like deep relief carving. So this will also be painted in colorful pattern, which again just adds to the floral arrangement of the design. The following carving demonstration was recorded at our club's venue at the 2006 Coffee County Fair. Before we get into those though, let me tell you how I prepared the workpiece that is being carved. The blanks for the rosettes were turned on the lathe and set aside. Then came the basic preparation of the board onto which the carving is done. Nothing Dunlap about that. I just milled the lumber and cut the outline of the pediment. After a little cleanup and with the wood in front of me, I began sketching the details of the Dunlap design. The demonstration takes up from that. Once again, we go to the book for the design layout. The drawing gave me all the details that I needed to make the layout. We're going to start our layout by reproducing the basket weave. And I might say this is a time that accuracy is very important. We want to be very precise and deliberate in laying out. I refer to my drawing quite often. This is a time that very fine pencil lines are important. That's why I choose to use a .05 fine pencil. Normal layout tools are required: T-bevel, square, ruler, straight edge. So it's just simply reproducing the drawing from the book, and you're doing this on the workpiece. But to make the basket weave all come out right, accuracy and preciseness is really important. What I'm doing here is marking out segments along the bottom edge. In this particular case, are 5/8 of an inch apart, and we'll use the T-bevel to transpose the angle. Now I'm beginning to form the weave of the basket. This is a process that I take my time with, just to be sure that I maintain my accuracy. Now I'm going back the other way, crisscrossing. One thing I may point out here is I begin my basket weave carving, as you will see later, with the full thickness of my piece. Later I will bandsaw that out to about 1/4 inch thick. This prevents chip out from the bottom side. By this time I'm able to beginning to see the basket weave on my workpiece. Now, to make this more visually apparent to me and to assist in my carving, the first thing that I'm going to do next is to pencil in or color with my pencil those areas that I'm going to remove. It just makes me more able to see it visually. And again, I take my time on deciding what area I'm going to remove, because this has to do with the repetitive pattern of the basket weave, and it's really necessary that you keep everything in order. Now I think that you can begin to see the visual layout of the basket weave. Now, after my layout has been finalized on the workpiece, now I'm going to start defining the basket weave itself with a chisel. I'm using a 1-inch straight chisel. I grind my chisel to a very small cutting angle, even though that promotes little chips on the cutting edge. It makes a nice clean line. And I'm just following my pencil lines, keeping in mind the over and under pattern of the basket. This is where you really need to be careful, because any miscut with a chisel, it's very difficult to correct. And that's why I take so much time with a pencil layout, to be sure that I'm correct and accurate. In fact, I find it quite refreshing to be able to sit down and do something like this as a change of venue. And I can also say that it increases your skill with hand tools, and it's really a good exercise in accuracy. Oh, by the way, one comment I might make about chisel, I like long shank chisels. It just helps me in control. It helps me in, for instance, I need to hold the chisel relatively vertical here. It's much easier to hold a longer shank chisel vertical than it is a short one. So I have grown to really appreciate the longer chisels in almost everything that I do. Now we're beginning to remove the in between the weaves, and as you notice, first of all, I'm taking an awl and I'm marking the center of the area that we're going to carve out. I take a 1/4 inch brad point drill bit and drill out the center. That removes a lot of the bulk of the wood, and where you don't have to be quite as aggressive with the chisel in actually removing the wood. So you've got each one of these to bore out. And again, the reason I used an awl is just an effort to be precise, because I want the hole drilled right in the center of what I have marked, darkened in to remove. There may be other ways to do this. I found this to work for me, and if you'll notice, I'm boring all the way through, but I'm not going to carve all the way through, as we'll explain a little bit later. Now then, I'm using a 1/4 inch chisel that I have specially ground on this, and I have I'm removing the area that was darkened in, and I just simply shear the sides with this chisel, and I generally do it in 2 passes. If you can notice, I've marked a depth gauge on with some tape, and that's about a 1/2 inch deep, and I'm only going to need about 1/4 of an inch after I saw it out. And now then, you can see the basket weave beginning to take its shape. I'm just paring off the sides. And again, I have this chisel ground with a very shallow cutting angle, simply because I'm using it as to pare the wood. But I'm setting it in that little groove that I laid out originally. You have to go around it twice. Well, you don't have to be so aggressive with it. Actually, it goes pretty fast, really. Now we've begun to relief carve the weaves themselves. We finished carving out the part that we're going to remove between the weaves, and now we're coming and lowering the weaves to give it the basket weave effect. And again, this is another chance to get your pattern off. So once again, we have to be very careful and being sure that we have the right sequence and forming the repetitive pattern of the basket weave. To do this, I'm using a 1/2 inch straight chisel, again ground to a very fine low cutting angle. And if you'll notice, to form the basket weave, we do every other weave. We lower every other weave. This is probably the quickest and easiest part of the carving process. I'd like to show you the way that I sharpen. Everyone has their own way of sharpening, but I find that the Japanese water stones suit my needs. I keep them stored in a container filled with water. And again, I very carefully rock the heel and the edge of the tube where I'll be sure it's flat on the stone, and deliberately hone the face. I have different grades of water stones. This is about a 1200 grit. And I also hone the bottom side of the chisel. I hone the back side of the tube. And now I'm going to polish the tube one purpose is to make the tube slide on the wood. The other objective is to create finer burrs on the edge. Well, I can say that a sharp tube certainly improves your ability to carve and makes carving a pleasure. I've turned it around, now I'm doing the other side. And all the carving that I'm doing on this is done all with straight chisels. So you don't have to have an inventory of a lot of carving chisels to do this. We have now almost completed the basket weave carving. Now we're going to lay out and carve the fan. And this is a somewhat similar, more simple process than the basket weave. After I have laid it out with a pencil, then I come over the pencil line with a knife and make a slight knife cut, which more or less better defines the line and gives me a place to eventually place the point of my chisel when I start making the incised cut to form the components of the fan. And again, I try to be as accurate as I possibly can. Now that we have a knife incision along each ray of the fan, we're going to place, I'm using a 1-inch straight chisel, and we're going to place it in the incision that we made with a knife, and we're going to go progressively deeper as we go towards the outer surface of the fan. I have to do this to define each segment of the fan.
Yeah, that's what it looked like. That's right. He's a good guy.
I do a lot of repair work.
Now we're going to begin the final part of carving the fan. And to do this, I've called upon one of my older chisels. It's a high carbon steel chisel, and this is another reason that I like the long shank chisels. But what I'm doing is just rounding over each segment of the fan. And I'm using the straight chisel to carve a convex surface. And I do this by just a series of beveling off the edge until it becomes a curved surface. We're not quite through, but as you can see, the fan's beginning to take shape. And this exercise is another exercise that increases your skill using hand tools. And this is one reason, I guess, that it is rewarding for me, because I'm able to use the tools in a very precise way. I'm taking very light cuts, but with a chisel that has ground to a very small cutting angle and honed properly, then the light cuts are made fairly easily, even into the grain to somewhat. Now we're down to the last part of our carving, and that is carving the rosettes. The objective is to make the rosettes look like a flower. And I do this by dividing it up into sections and carving it in a manner that the flower has petals. So I've got to go now to some carving gouges, and I have a fairly small set of gouges that I use for carvings like this. I think I've got it laid out to create 8 petals around the circumference of the flower. So it's just a simple matter of carving each petal. Then, as we'll see later, we'll texture the surface to make it more resemble a flower. This carves very well while you're carving down the grain, but again, we all know the consequences of carving across the grain, which we have to do on some of this on each side of the rosette. Simple, but it can be, this same process can be used by creating rosettes for other uses in furniture. It's just up to your imagination and your creativity. Now I'm going to use a very small gouge. It's a 1/16 inch gouge, and just texture the surface to make it look of a natural form. And quite simply, that's pretty much all is involved in carving the rosettes. Dunlap may not be your choice of furniture design, but I hope this presentation and their designs and techniques may inspire you to work in your choice of period furniture. The Dunlap designs have earned a place in furniture history. They can't be given the title period, but they certainly have enhanced the period in which they worked. On May 2nd, 2006, a Dunlap chest on chest sold at auction for $90,000.